Well, it's so good to have Philip on. How you doing today, Philip?
Good, Keith. How about you?
I'm great. It's an awesome day in the Lord, so can't complain.
Every day that we're alive, that's a good day for my book.
That's right, exactly. I love to ask my guests this question. So, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Um, God will provide.
Oh, I like that one. I've heard it.
Very, yeah, I'm glad you have. The backstory about that, Keith, real quick, is that that was something that my wife gave me as parting words when I went to work, especially during a tough time in my
Yeah.
life. So we would pray together, and I ask her for a reminder, and she says, "God will provide." I mean, she'll preface that by saying, "You have the best wife in the world," but she'll then come out with the solid advice of saying, "God will provide." Okay, that's what I was looking for. Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you for that reminder. That advice is helpful.
It is helpful because I think, especially during those tough times, we start to rely so much on ourselves and look for answers in ourselves. And just a reminder that stop working so hard at it. God has your back and we're trusting him, rely on him. And he always surprises you.
Absolutely,
Sometimes in the most amazing ways if you just stay out of his way and you let him show you just how awesome and amazing he is.
amen to that.
Yeah. Love talking to Pastor about God things. So one of my favorite things to do. Um, as you think about your life and your career, and I saw your career is very impressive what God has done in your life. Who were some people along your journey who served to inspire you and become role models for you? Tell us a little bit about them and kind of give them get a chance to give them a shout out for what they've meant to you in your life.
Yeah, of course. So I'll definitely start with a heavenly shout out to my grandparents. So my grandmother and my grandfather, and the story behind those two, um, they were married for many, many years. They are what I would see as a present day example for me of what marriage should be in 2024 and beyond. And they were married, they were committed, they raised kids together, they taught the word of God to them, and they even taught that to the grandparents. So as far as like to your children's children,
Right.
that sort of inheritance that like they abided by that. Um, and in particular, my grandmother was very helpful because when I was growing up, there was no such thing talked about widely and publicly, especially among the African American community, about a kid being on the autism spectrum, right? This was something was like either your kid was special or they used some other word that we can't use now,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Uh, so um, my grandmother got wind of it and she thought that there's something special about me that God has put inside me, and it's part of her job as my grandmother to help, bring it out. And so that belief in myself, when many people did not, and really carried over the value of education, and in particular having a strong relationship with Jesus Christ. Those were things that carried on to me even years after her passing. And so now on to my grandfather. My grandfather basically was the best model I had growing up on what a godly man should be. So I'll just pause there and say my grandfather,
Right. Yeah.
not my father, right?
Interesting.
Uh, and so I think from there, he served in the church, he was in the Word, he was very opinionated. Some people call it old fashioned now or traditional. But when I think about it now as a married father myself, I take a lot of example from him as far as what a godly man should be. Because if it was sufficient back then, as far as what he was basing who he was based on the word, then that's good enough for me to keep that legacy going.
Right. That's awesome. I love that. Philip, kind of give us your personal story because I looked at your bio, and the bio doesn't really tell the story; just kind of tells the accomplishments. But kind of give us the backstory of your journey.
Hey, but isn't that the type of generation we live in now? It's all highlights now.
It's all highlights and snapshots, right? Snapshots and
It,
sound bites.
it's the Sports Center generation. It's the Instagram filters, right? And if you don't like it, you can just delete it and try again, repost it.
Yeah, it's the
Um,
posterization of our society.
yeah, exactly. What's wrong with that?
That's right.
That's real life.
Right.
So yeah, the real life story for me, born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, single mother, had a sister, grandparents, and my aunt. They helped my mom as far as like raising us. Um, Value of education became very clear to me, like in 7th and 8th grade. Up until then, I was just trying to fit in, and really just took that seriously. Whereas like the best way I felt I could, really pay it forward and honor my mother and my grandparents and those that had raised me and sacrificed for me was to do the very best I could academically. I couldn't, they wouldn't let me get a job to help support, put me, put food on the table. They're like, your job, Philip, is to excel in the classroom. Okay. And I don't want no poor performance reviews at the end of the quarter. Okay.
Right.
Otherwise, we're going to have some problems. You don't want no problems with me. Okay. Um, and so that's what I did. I straightened up as early as like 7th grade, became valedictorian in my class. 8th grade, went to a prestigious high school. After that, did well there, graduated top 10%, got accepted to every college I applied to, including Ivy League, but didn't go to Ivy League. I went to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, primarily because they paid my whole way as far as a full scholarship. It's kind of tough.
Was it because of basketball?
I think that was icing on the cake, Keith. The campus was beautiful. Went to a basketball game when visiting. I was like, this is going to be a tough decision because at the time, I had already got accepted by my top choice, Harvard College.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so once the scholarship came through, I was like, okay, we got a tough decision here. And my mom's probably not going to be really thrilled to hear about it because she had her, heart set on Harvard for me too. But after consoling her and drying some tears from her face, not mine, I said, listen, I'll make a promise to you. Let me go to North Carolina. You don't have to pay a thing. And I'll do well there. And I'll do my best afterwards to go to Harvard, but for business school. And so that was a promise I made back when I was 18. It took me a little time to actually fulfill that. It got to around 2016 when I was actually able to graduate from Harvard Business School. But I feel like that was something that I wanted to do for my mom, just as a credit, for what she did for me. And then shortly after business school, literally a day after graduation, I got married to my wife now of 8 years. We now have 2 twin daughters that are 7 years old. And so I think now it's just basically, in a place where really figuring out the next chapter that God has for me while I'm raising these 2 kids with my wife.
That's a beautiful story. So I had you on because we connected because of the book you wrote. And the title of your book is Disagree Without Disrespect: How to Respectfully Debate with Those who you think, believe, and vote differently. What led you to write this book?
So it happened around 4th of July last year. I told you all these good things about my mom. And so let's continue the story here. So my mom came up to visit us in Boston with my sister. And so, she got to see her kids and her grandkids. We were going to have a great time. So we were sitting in the living room. My sister was talking about some topic. I don't even remember it now, but there was clearly a difference of opinion on that particular topic. And I saw it as a perfect idea or opportunity to engage with her and share and learn more about her. And my mom thought otherwise. She said, nope. Flag on the play. She put on her referee, umpire shirt, mask on, whatever you want to call it. Threw the flag on the play. Said, we're not going to engage on this because I don't want no fighting to happen and us not have, a good 4th of July. I don't want fireworks before the actual fireworks tonight, basically.
Right.
And I get it. She was playing peacemaker. I think at the end of it, though, I felt at a loss. And the reason why I felt at a loss, Keith, was that, you know, my thought on this was I don't see my sister often. And this was something, as far as us having a conversation, that I was looking at not so much trying to win an argument or get into some sort of fight verbally, but more so to share my perspective, because I knew that my viewpoint was different from hers and probably different from the majority of my family.
Okay.
And so I think that what came off of my mind was just the thought of, if this is happening with me and my family, like how many other people around the country, around the world, are having those type of awkward situations where if you have a difference of opinion, and it doesn't even have to deal with politics, how can you engage with people you love and you respect and work with in a way where it's okay to disagree and you can do it without being disagreeable or disrespectful? And so that's where it came off to me. It's like, hey, let me put some pen to paper here. Came up with a framework for it. And that's what came out of this book, Disagree Without Disrespect: How to Respectfully Debate with Those Who Think, Believe, and Vote Differently from You.
So I looked at your book and I noticed that you had some kind of bullet points of things you want to accomplish through this book. And one of them was helping people understand the critical role of embracing diversity of thought in civil discourse. So, how do you help people navigate that aspect in our daily conversation?
Right. So I think one thing that comes off, Keith, is really in educating people what diversity of thought is,
Right.
and why is it important in our civil discourse, or just to break it down another level, just in our society, just us, our regular conversations, our interpersonal relationships with people. It's one of those things that when it comes to diversity of thought, it's understanding, hey, like, it's okay to have different viewpoints, because if you're in business, that's what they call like innovation, right? It's like you didn't do the same thing for 200 years. Otherwise, we still be riding around on a horse and carriage right now.
Right.
Somebody had to have a different thought. It's like, what if we actually had wheels and put, some sort of contraption on top of them and called it an automobile? Or let alone, we wouldn't be talking right now across the country like this, seeing each other, because otherwise we'd be going off of a telegram or
Right.
messenger
Exactly.
service if there wasn't somebody that thought differently and say, hey, let's try this. Let's see if we can not only have people call in on a telephone, but now we can do it where it's like people can video conference from their computers, from their homes and offices, and they don't even have to be in the same place.
Right.
Right. So diversity of thought is not a new thing. It's just new for this generation. It's just new for where this society is. And so what it's really about is sharing how non-foreign this is, and help people to understand that we actually can do a lot of good once we reinstitute what the rules of engagement are. So a good example of that, Keith, would be, my mom, she works in the courtroom. I keep talking about my mom, man. I don't know what you said, Keith. Shout outs to my mom, man.
Yeah,
So
you didn't mention her and the people you talked about.
I mean, hey, you get in where you fit in, man. So I mean, she works in a courtroom, and so she's used to having attorneys come in, plead their case, and this sort. Some people, on one side very for an issue, and then another one very against the issue. And they'll argue passionately, outspokenly, even aggressively. But one of the things I picked up on growing up was when they finish debating, when they come out of the courtroom, the decision is made, somebody won, somebody lost. More times than not, I would often see both those same attorneys. They shake hands, they congratulate the person on the case, and oftentimes they'll be seen like eating lunch together, going to like their daughter's soccer game on the weekends, or even spending time with the family during the holiday season. Now, initially, for the untrained eye, you're thinking to yourself, okay, you're like colluding with the enemy here. You're like, that's where sleeping with the enemy, that phrase came from.
Right.
Right. Like the person that's in the midst of this, they got hosed, Keith. They got hosed in the process. Um, but the lesson learned for me was you can have a difference of opinion and you can still work with one another. Or as my mom would say, Philip, just because I disagree with you, that does not mean that I don't love you. So
Right.
this whole principle that love and respect for one another is not contingent on you agreeing with them on everything. If we got a good sense, a good grounding on that principle alone, man, like what kind of world would we live in now? What a wonderful world this would be compared to what we have now.
Right. And I think what you're just describing to me, as I try to wrap my mind around what's happening in our society, is we have dehumanized the other side. And I can't respect your opinion if I don't respect you as a human. And and as we would say, as people who work in the church or work as Christians, everybody was created and designed by God. So that means they're special and unique because God created them. If we don't see the person across the table from us who we disagree with their views as a beautiful masterpiece of God, we can never really understand and listen to what they have to say. I think we have lost that ability to see the other person as human and unique and special. And so we just devalue them and we can discredit everything they have to say because we discredit them as an individual and as a human. And that's the saddest thing about our discourse to me is we don't see the other side as human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. The thought is, you know, it's almost like just simple logic. I know I went to different schools, Keith, but just a simple logic here, just on the ultimate source, the Bible, the ultimate textbook, right?
Right.
Um, if we were made in God's image, then there should be value that we see in each person because God sees value in that person too.
Right.
If we don't see value in that person, we are not being like God. God is our creator. God is our heavenly father. We should be more like him because we were made in his image.
Right.
So for us to place judgment on somebody like that and devalue that person, that is not reflective of his image. And if his image is good, then what is the opposite of his image?
Right.
Right. So it's that sort of thought where it's just like, even to another degree too, Keith, like, listen, God knows everything. God is
Mm-hmm.
good, right? Do you not think that God disagrees with what we say, think, and do on a daily basis?
Right. Exactly.
Like, what would it be like if God canceled us?
Well, we have a short little blip in the history books there.
Like, 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 think about it. Like, God is so powerful, right? He can throw like Satan fell down like lightning, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it rains, I still see lightning happening,
Right.
thunder, right? If God wanted to strike every person that was counter to his goodness, do you know how few people would be living
Yes.
after like an hour of him doing that?
Right. Exactly.
But he doesn't do that. He's merciful. He still allows us to live despite us hitting our heads across the brick wall.
Right.
So it's like, if he's that merciful for us, even Christians who don't always get it right, how much more merciful should we look towards being other people that disagree with us simply because God is that merciful and loving towards us as well?
Exactly. You have another concept I want to kind of touch on in your book, well, a couple others, but the word respect. Um, I've noticed as I'm older, that somewhere along the way, that word respect became an issue because I served in a lot of rural and urban communities. So, like in Detroit, St. Louis, Milwaukee, Chicago, that word respect has kind of shifted. And if you disrespect me, then I can retaliate. So as you think about that word respect, as you talk about in your book, how do you define it, and how do we regain that as we talk about this discourse with each other?
So when you say that, Keith, I instantly think of a lot of people thinking respect, whether rural or urban communities, um, almost from a position of fear,
Yeah.
right? which is odd now that I say that, because I'm thinking like the fear of God in the Bible, that is more so like a deep reverence and respect for God, right?
Right.
But in this
Sense of
case,
sense of awe.
right, we're not talking about that here
Yeah,
with
no.
regular human beings. We're talking about, I'm disrespecting you if I accidentally scuffed your Air Jordans while walking to the grocery store. And now I got a fear for my life because now you're thinking about pulling up on me
Right.
because I accidentally scuffed your shoes. I disrespected you. Right. And so I think about when the whole concept of respect comes from is like, this shouldn't be Philip's definition of respect. This is more like, okay, what is the legacy definition of respect? Like, what is that like? And so I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, I wouldn't treat everyone like God, because that's a supreme level of fear and reverence that should only be reserved to God, right? Otherwise, we have idols,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
So, not too far from there would be the sense of respect, like we just talked about before. Like, every person is made in the image of God. Okay, so if God sees value in them, I see value in them too. So it's reflecting that value as far as like, being courteous, being nice, being gentle, being respectful in the sense of like, hey, I recognize the value and dignity of who you are. And whether we disagree on the issue or you accidentally scuff my shoes, like, I value you enough to treat you in the proper way. And sometimes that might mean turning the other cheek. Sometimes that might mean giving you water despite you spitting at me. Um, but it's more so the sense like it has to be based on some sort of model or archetype as far as who you try to resemble. And I think it really comes back to me, at least, the best example I think of is when Jesus, washes other people's feet. Because Jesus, he had inherent value and dignity in himself. He knew he was. He took the lowest form of service to honor people that were still lowlier than him out of love.
Right.
And so it's one of the things that it comes off is like, amongst peers, how do we love one another? How do we serve one another? Whether from a high level or a low level, fully knowing who we are as far as what our value is, but also respecting the value of other people and seeing that enough to be of service, to be of companionship, to be good to others, even if they're not returning the favor.
That's great. So you wrote this book so you can solve all of our problems and make us all get along as a world. How's that going?
Well, listen, the first thing I think of is we got this big book called the Bible, right? That was written many years ago. So my book far is not even on like the consideration of MVP, right? MVB, like most valuable book
Right.
compared to the Bible, and we still got people not adhering or completely discarding what the book says. What I would say, at least from my sense, is that what's been helpful for people, that those that read my book, is they're seeing a sense of clarity in terms of what they can apply. Because it's one thing to read something and then put it back on the bookshelf. Oh, that's an interesting read. Like, that's not the purpose of this book. That's not the purpose of the Bible. It's not like, oh, this is nice. This is good sayings, good lessons. Oh, this is good philosophy. You go back to your normal life after you put it on the shelf. No, it's about application. Like, what you learn, you want to apply it in real life. And that's the similar vein I took with Disagree Without Disrespect. It's, that 5-step framework. How do you start applying that in your next conversation? Or you learn the background as far as why we got to this point and why diversity of thought is needed. And so you're thinking about it in terms of, while you're in the workplace in your next team meeting and they're sharing ideas. Well, your idea is valuable. Go ahead and put it on the table to see, everyone's thought being considered, right? Or just a sense as far as like, how you go about working with people that are not Christians, and you're sharing with them something that they hadn't learned about before, weren't exposed before, weren't considering before. it's really just trying to apply what's learned. And so far, from the feedback I've gotten from readers, it's been good. It's been good as far as application of what's been written.
I noticed that one aspect of your book, and I think it's one of the most important aspects, is how do you master the art of active listening? I think the communication and how we listen and interact when we're listening is so key. So talk about a little bit about how you promote that understanding of that aspect of your book in our dialogue and our discourse.
It's one of those things that you don't typically long for better times beforehand,
Right.
but sometimes I do, when you didn't have like the phone,
Right.
when you didn't have all these distractions, um, that are constantly vying for your attention. Because I think when active listening comes to play, what comes off of my head, Keith, is everything around me could be burning up. And in this sense, even if I said that analogy, you probably would say, Keith, Philip, you should have enough sense to say, if your house is burning, you should have enough sense to say, hey, Keith, my house is burning. I gotta go. I'm listening to you, but I gotta go. Let's reconnect after I get out of the house and
Right.
figure out what's going
Exactly.
on. But so maybe that analogy doesn't quite work out, but more so the thought behind it, the intention was, the conversation I'm having with you, Keith, is the most important thing for me to engage on right now. And so for me to not focus on what am I going to say next to you after what you said, or come up with a quick rebuttal or haha, to what you have to say, it's like more like I'm trying to understand where Keith is coming from. What is his perspective here? What is the background? What is the backstory behind it? Because in some sense, you're sharing something that is not only potentially vulnerable to you, to me, but it's also something that is personal, or like it's almost like a gift, because you're sharing with me what you've been thinking, what's on your mind, what's of concern. Like, you're opening yourself up to me. And so if I'm not respecting that enough to be attentive, to be present, to be engaged with what you're saying, then the message that comes off to you, Keith, in some sense, is you don't matter as much.
Right.
You don't matter as much as far as what I'm going to say next. You don't matter as much compared to what I need to do next. And so, in that same vein, like if nothing else, just being able to sit down and listen to people and fully like actively listen, like hear what's going on and understand it. And if you don't understand it, ask questions. Don't just take it on face value. Like, ask clarifying questions. You're probably not going to disrespect that person. They're probably going to be thankful that you actually care enough to learn more.
Right.
And so I think that, in the midst of all the distractions we have at our fingertips, literally, I think it's one of those things where, that is a great way of showing respect for other people. Just being there, being present, and actively listening to what you have to say.
That's great. So Philip, I'm curious, as you think about where you are right now in your season of your life, what are you most excited about?
I'm most excited about my girls being of age at 7 years old, where they start to remember good memories. Now they can also remember bad memories. And so my focus as a parent is to try to limit those bad memories and expand on the good ones, right? But it's one where it's like thinking, the joys of parenthood, the joys of fatherhood, the joys of that next stage of marriage. Um, that's what I'm most excited about, because I think, you're right. If you read my bio, there's a lot of accomplishments. It's like a highlight reel, that sort. But I guess the story now, as I'm approaching 40, is more the thought of, what's really important to me now. And that's really being a good steward of what God has blessed me with. And that's my family. And really taking that moment to say, hey, look, these next 10 to 11 years, we have these girls with us. I want them to be full of memories that, when my wife and I are in rocking chairs and that sort later on, not only do we have good memories we can recollect, but the girls, as they grow up, they'll have plenty of stories, plenty of memories, and a fondness of their childhood and what it was like, being raised with us. Because I can honestly attest to you, that's not the case for everybody.
Right.
You still have many people that are reliving childhoods that were not pleasant. Some that have questions for their parents, that is trying to address past hurts, and that might be 20 years later after the hurt has actually been done. The parent has already moved on or even transitioned on.
Right.
But there's still hurt that needs to be addressed. So I take it very seriously, the thought of, listen, my childhood was the best it could be given the circumstances, and I have an opportunity with each day I've been blessed to live again, to add another moment, add another day, both for my wife and also my girls, of a pleasant, worthwhile, memorable experience of us as a family.
It's great. And this is a more personal question. I like to ask my guests this question. We kind of begin to wind down our great conversation. What do you want your legacy to be?
I want my legacy to be a continuation of what my grandparents were. The values of education, faith in God, personal relationship with Jesus Christ, a biblical worldview, those sorts of things that come up, those sorts of values and principles. Me being somebody that was outspoken for God, that stood on his word, even in the midst of a world that would gladly do life without him.
Sure.
And so, I can't impact the whole world. That's not my job. Jesus, he can take that on.
Right.
Jesus, take the wheel on that one. But I can influence the world most close to me, and that's my family. And so what type of husband was I? What type of father was I? Was I faithful? Was I present? Was I loving? Was I caring? Was I wise in my instruction given to them, passing that on to them so that they can pass on to their next generation as far as grandkids and thereon? That's what I want to be known for, because I think that we live in a world now that is constantly trying to redefine what's right and what's wrong, and what does it mean to be X versus Y.
Right.
And I think at some point, men and women, especially of the faith, have to stand strong, even if you feel like you're in a minority of one, and say, listen, this is what I was taught. This is what I believe was right back then. And just because 20, 30 years have passed on, that doesn't mean that this is any less right now. So, just wanted to stand on that and just pass that legacy, for the next generation of those I have the fortune to be able to impact and influence going forward.
That's powerful. As we wrap up our conversation, what are some key takeaways you want our audience and our listeners to remember from our discussion today?
Definitely find good people to shout out.
Yeah.
As far as people that have been influential to you. It just, count your blessings. Name them one by one each day. And a lot of that deals with the people that God has put in your life, and lessons learned that maybe in the process, in that moment, you might not have thought was good, but God had a higher purpose because his ways are not our ways. That later on you can understand, like, okay, that's why that happened. That's why this detour had to take place. And so just being open to that. And then also the part about the importance of diversity of thought. You can disagree with the idea, and still love the believer. That's kind of a play on hating the sin and loving the sinner.
Right.
Because we still see each other with that image of God in each one of us. And so we should be as respectful and as loving, to those people, whether they agree with us or not, because our Heavenly Father loves us as well.
What are some key takeaways you want people to get who read your book?
So I think the key takeaways would just be the framework, right? I touched on one of them earlier, but just from step 1 to step 5, first one is, separate the issue or belief from the identity of the believer. Part of the reason why it's so tough to have a conversation or debate with people is that, people can be so intertwined with one particular issue or belief that it becomes who they are, right? So to disagree with the issue means you're disagreeing with that person and who that person is. Or to criticize that belief or idea, now they're taking it personal, saying, I'm criticizing you, right?
Right.
You go to the second step and say, hey, I can disagree with the belief and I can love you as the believer. I can still respect you as a believer, right? When you set that framework, now we can actually debate on the issue at hand. Let's focus that on, I don't know, the merits of the issue at hand. Like, let's talk about facts, data, logic, performance, analysis, review of that performance, rather than these outlandish name calling or over drawn out emotional responses that, I'm pouring my eyes out crying. Keith's gonna be like, I don't know how to respond to that, so I'm just gonna go exit stage left.
Exactly.
Right? So if you focus on just the merits of it, even when you finish, whether it's me coming to your side, Keith, or vice versa, maybe we stay on our separate corners, or maybe a third alternative came out and we weren't even expecting it. Let's do what we learned in sports we do at the end of every game. We shake hands. It's a good game. They still do that nowadays. And so when you're still able to do that, show that good sportsmanship, and then still respect and love that person afterwards, the key then is be able to keep the door open for further dialogue. So that could be the sense where it's like, you know what, Keith, I appreciate you sharing what your thoughts are. I still feel this certain type of way after our engagement, but I feel that much more educated or that much more aware of what's important to you and why that is. And I appreciate you sharing that with me. And I'd be open to learning more about it over lunch next week.
Right.
Or maybe we can go to this event and they have this like coffee, meet and greet there and that sort of afterwards. And we can talk about what we discussed or what we heard about. So keeping the conversation open, because oftentimes what you have is if someone disagrees with someone else, they cancel you, they unfriend you. There's no like back and forth dialogue happening because that's been cut off. Let's not be like the world. Let's be ones that can say, hey, my door is open. Let's continue the conversation. And I think when you have that framework in mind, I think you'll start to come off as somebody that has that light that this dark world desperately needs.
I love that. Where can people find your book, Disagree Without Disrespect, How to Respectfully Debate and with Those Who Think and Believe and Vote Differently?
Absolutely. So it's available on Amazon. So you can go to Amazon.com, look up Disagree Without Disrespect. You can also look up my name, Philip Blackett, Philip Blackett. You'll be able to find the book and my other books there as well.
And where can they connect with you if they want to learn more about you and what you're doing on social media?
So yeah, you can definitely follow me on LinkedIn. I'm on other platforms too, Twitter, Instagram. Just look up my name, Philip Blackett. And also you can go to my website, philipblackett.com. PhilipBlackett.com.
Well, Philip, thanks so much for taking the time to be a guest on the podcast, and blessings on the work you do. May people go out and buy this book, leave a review, because that's how people can find the book, and the book gets more play on Amazon. So thank you for this really engaging conversation.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Keith. It was great to have this conversation with you as well.